What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Tuesday, August 12th, 2025, and the Cardinals are coming off of a thrilling win on Monday night, 3-2 over the Colorado Rockies. I know anytime you're beating the Rockies in 2025, it's maybe not a cause for celebration. It's basically just doing what you were supposed to do. But the Cardinals were very much at risk of not doing what they were supposed to do last night, despite getting a really strong outing from Mikolas just 5 days after I said, hey, maybe move this guy to the bullpen in favor of Kyle Leahy. The irony on that one is not lost on me. But Miles was very good last night. And I do believe last week when we talked about that conversation, I said, look, Miles is going to have good starts the rest of the year. And more likely than not, those good ones from him are going to come when the Cardinals are at home. His ERA is not quite half at home of what it is on the road, but it's not too far off. His ERA at home is in the threes. I believe on the road it's in the sixes this season. But last night, Miles Mikolas pitching at home in the comforts of Busch Stadium, 6 2/3 innings of strong baseball to help guide the Cardinals past the Rockies. But Cardinals wouldn't have got there if not for the contributions late of a couple of gentlemen. One, Kyle Leahy, the guy that I had made an argument, the Cardinals should be stretching him out to consider him for a rotation spot or even like a piggyback situation with Miles Mikolas. I just prefer Lehey getting the bulk of that arrangement. Kyle Leahy was great last night. 2 1/3, 1 hit allowed, 2 strikeouts. He was the combination of the bulk reliever and the closer for the Cardinals, and yet he didn't get a save. He got the win because the Cardinals were trailing when Kyle Leahy came into the game. However, they weren't trailing for too terribly long because of the contributions of another player. It's the guy you see right there on your screen, Brendan Donovan, coming off the bench for the Cardinals last night to come up with a very clutch hit, scoring a couple of runs and giving the Cardinals a 3-2 lead that they would not relinquish with a clean ninth inning from Lehey as he improves to 3-1, ERA down to 2.49 for the season. Miles Mikolas was good, 6 2/3, 2 runs, improves his ERA to 4.97 on the season. But how about Brendan Donovan? I mean, this was a guy that we weren't super sure was even available for the game. Ollie Marmol telling media, as I've since found out, that he's going to go through all of his normal routines before the game, and he says he's available, good to go after that, then, he'll be available and good to go. But it sounded like, based on what Randy Carricker was sharing this morning on the broadcast, and I believe it was actually Chip Carey that came up with this, and he would know, Cardinals television broadcaster that we interviewed this morning on STL Sports Central, if you'd like to go back and check out that interview from the Randy Carricker show today. Chip Carey saying that, look, before the game, Ollie was not necessarily too keen on using Brendan Donovan yesterday because the preference is once a guy is cleared physically, if you can get him that extra day to be able to rest, recuperate, and get back to 100%, and that's oftentimes something very useful to the player. But the Cardinals couldn't afford to. The opportunity came about there in the 8th inning where Brendan Donovan could come up, a key at bat, runners on base, and he hits a ball into the right field corner, was able to score a couple of runs on it, and that double, his 25th of the season, gives the Cardinals the 3-2 lead. Brendan Donovan, he's a good player, man. And I know that he is a name that people were kind of back and forth on whether or not the Cardinals should have considered trading him at this past July 31 deadline. I was pretty steadfast. It would have to take a significant haul for me to consider it because the way that I look at this Cardinals team, it's going to be a winner the next time that Brendan Donovan is in a position to help him do so. Let me rephrase that. Brendan Donovan's going to be here the next time the Cardinals win. He's a good enough player to be one of your headlining guys. He's a young enough player to where if you wanted to, and I believe you should want to, you could extend him a contract offer this offseason. You could eat up a couple of years of arbitration, a couple of years of free agency, maybe an option or two tacked on to the end of that. And, of course, Brendan Donovan would have to be amenable to it, but a contract that takes you age 29, 30, 31, 32, those are not the years that I worry about for Brendan Donovan to suddenly start tapering off. You get to 33, 34, 35, maybe that's a different conversation. That's just more of a natural progression and aging curve for baseball players. But I feel like Brendan Donovan is right in the prime of his career, and I'm not looking at his age as a mark against him in terms of why the Cardinals shouldn't anchor to Brendan Donovan and let him be one of the main pieces of this next iteration of Cardinal baseball. I know that recently he hasn't been performing as well And look, maybe the mounting injury nicks and cuts that he was dealing with were part of the reason for that. Maybe the groin stuff that he was dealing with over the weekend was more of a recent development. I don't know the exact answer to that. But I do know that players slump. It happens for all guys. It happens for the best in the league. And it happened to Brendan Donovan. But I think you're going to get a good version of Brendan Donovan, assuming he is back to health once again for the rest of the season. And I think that the numbers are going to end up being what Brendan Donovan numbers are, which is an OPS in the high 700s. Right now he's at 757. So a little bit of ways to go to get it back up to where it had been. He's going to have an upper 700s OPS. He's going to play good defense for you at a variety of positions, mostly second base, though, right now. Seems like the place that he's going to land more often than not. And he's going to, whether it's lead off or somewhere else in the lineup, give you a legitimate AB 4 or 5 times a game. That's what Brendan Donovan brings to the table. Is he a superstar? No. But, it's interesting. We talked about this earlier on Tuesday morning on the Randy Carricker show. Again, you can check that out at STL Sports Central. He mentioned the list that ESPN recently came out with of the top 50 players in baseball. I think it's a pretty much a right now type of list. They did an in-season update to MLB's top 50 players. So it's guys who are active and healthy and playing. And so superstars who are injured, I don't think are considered for this list. And it's also not a list when you look at the future or you're projecting what young players might turn into. It's just what guys are doing right now. There were no Cardinals on this list. I don't know that should necessarily come as a surprise to anybody because the Cardinals, as I just mentioned, well, Brendan Donovan's your best player, as I've reiterated a number of times, and he's not a superstar. Well, they don't have one, is what that means. You can make a case, as we did this morning, Mason Wynn is maybe the closest thing to that the Cardinals have. The closest thing to a top 50 player in baseball right now might not be Donovan, although he does provide versatility and flexibility with quality defense at a number of positions. And his offensive game has been pretty useful to the Cardinals this year. Mason Wynn actually might be the better candidate. I don't know if people totally realize it, and it was in my comments here on YouTube the other day, so I want to make sure don't remember who to credit with this, but I do want to make sure to discuss it because they said, hey, Mason Wynn's having an outlier season defensively, and not enough people are talking about it. So here, I'm going to talk about it. Outs above average leaderboard. StatCast puts this on Baseball Savant. It's their number crunching that's done, but it's just one of the many defensive metrics that is pretty useful to glean who's good and maybe who's not as good defensively across Major League Baseball. Mason Wynn leads the league. I'm not talking about the NL or the AL. I'm talking about both. He leads Major League Baseball in outs above average at 21. By the way, next on the list is a tie for 18 with 3 different players. Bobby Witt, PCA, and Nick Allen are the 3 players. You want to talk runs prevented? Well, Pete Crow Armstrong right now edges out Mason Wynn in that category, but that's the only one. Mason Wynn's second in Major League Baseball, 16 runs prevented. As I said, 21 outs above average, which leads the league by like a lot. Mason Wynn's having a phenomenal defensive season. His numbers offensively are not quite what you want him to be, but he's solid. He's a league average hitter, a 99 OPS plus, which means he's 1% below league average. He has a 2 for 4 night tonight, and that changes. He'd be league average for the season. And that's fine. You can live with that because I think he's the best shortstop defender in the game, and I think he should win a Gold Glove this year. We'll see if that ends up materializing or not, but I believe it should be in strong consideration. But Mason Wynn offensively, you start to think about, okay, he's got a 706 OPS. You're saying he's maybe the best player on the Cardinals, or could develop into that, certainly. Has the upside to do so because the defense, we know what it is. And if he had Brendan Donovan's stat line offensively, an OPS in the mid-750s, well, that pretty much would make him the best player on this team and the best player on several other teams. Considering how good his defense is, the wins above replacement would be a stat that Mason Wynn would really be able to stack up. I'll look and see what Baseball Reference says about Mason Wynn's current wins above replacement. His WAR is 2.6, according to Baseball Reference. Might be something a little bit different on Fangraphs, but you get the picture. I mean, he's a 4 or 5 win player, and if you advance his offense just a little bit, you could talk about opening up a ceiling where Mason Wynn really could become that superstar for the Cardinals. But they don't have one right now. And so that's why we talk about, okay, what are you getting at? What's the point here? Well, the Cardinals didn't have any players on that top 50 list. You know who else was not featured on that top 50 list, though? It's notable. The Milwaukee Brewers, who have soared to the best record, I believe the best record in baseball as of this moment. Let me check and make sure that's right. 74 and 44. They're 30 games above 500. They've won 10 straight, maybe even more than that. I'm just looking at their last 10. They have been unbelievable, and nobody's catching them in the National League Central Division. and probably in Major League Baseball, because they are several games clear of the best record in the game. But when you look at the Milwaukee Brewers, and you say, well, how in the world is that possible? Well, they don't do it with one superstar. They do it with a system. They do it with a roster that 1 through 26 is leagues better than anybody else in Major League Baseball. Their 1 through 9 is better than your 1 through 9. Not because they have a best hitter that's better than your best hitter. It's because their 6th best hitter is way better than your 6th best hitter. Their 7th, 8th, 9th best hitters, the same conversation. You look at Milwaukee Brewers statistically. I'm going to pull this up because it is kind of amazing. And I also think it could be a bit of a blueprint for how the Cardinals could do things a year or two from now if they can get to a point where they have the requisite talent to do so. But you think about their lineup, who scares you? Well, Jackson Chourio is a stud. We know that. He's got a 785 OPS, though. He does not have an OPS right now that's better than Alec Burleson. I think Burley's at 782 or 787. It's basically the same. Wilson Contreras, same conversation. Ivan Herrera is in the 830s on OPS. Of the regulars that have played all year for the Brewers, that's not a number that Jackson Chourio is meeting. It's not a number that Christian Yelich is meeting. Sal Frelick, Bryce Terang, William Contreras. Andrew Vaughn technically has an OPS over 1,000 since joining the Brewers, and he is one of the stories of baseball. To think that they had a pitcher, Aaron Savali, that they wanted to trade away, not because they really wanted to, but because he said, I don't want to be here anymore if you guys are going to take me out of the rotation. They said, okay, fine. We're going to send you to Siberia, Chicago White Sox, but in so doing, we're also going to bring in a player that needs a change of scenery, Andrew Vaughn. He was hitting terribly, seemingly losing his luster as a former prospect. But then since joining Milwaukee, 91 at-bats, he's hitting 352, on base of 419, 626 slug, OPSing 1045, that's over 1,000, with 7 home runs and fewer than 100 at-bats. He's been one of the best hitters in baseball. But outside of that, you kind of look at it and say, okay, well, who's great on this Brewers team? Isaac Collins has an 853 OPS, but that's kind of Ivan Herrera-esque when you consider only 273 at-bats. But the regulars, Chourio, 785. Yelich, 784. Rhys Hoskins, 768. Sal Frelick, 751. Bryce Terang, 750. William Contreras, 745. I mean, William Contreras is ranking basically 9th among current active Brewers in terms of OPS this season. And he's a really, really good player and one of the better catchers in baseball. Caleb Durbin. All right, talk about another trade that they made. The Brewers know when to unload somebody. Devin Williams was traded in the offseason. I believe that was the Nestor Cortez deal. And it really hasn't been that Nasty Nestor has contributed. I think he's injured. That was the my search coming up empty for Nestor sound. Yeah, he hasn't really hardly pitched at all this year. But they also got Caleb Durbin out of that trade, and he's plugging along for them. OPS of 703 and nearly 300 at-bats. He's not a star by any means, but he's a solid player, can play some different positions, and does a nice job for them. That's a full roster of position players that the Brewers are getting league average to slightly above league average production from on the season. When I think about the Cardinals, let me pull up their numbers offensively, because I actually don't believe the Cardinals are significantly far away from being this, and it's kind of the blueprint for what, if they can fix a couple of things about their lineup, I think you're actually in a very similar spot offensively to where the Brewers are. The Cardinals are not going to churn out pitching like the Brewers, not for at least a few years. Hopefully, the new regime with Chaim Bloom and Rob Strofolio, Matt Pierpont down there working on director of pitching type of stuff, they can end up with a similar philosophy and a similar result to the Milwaukee Brewers sometime down the road. It's unbelievable, though. If you've looked at the Brewers' numbers pitching-wise, it's just crazy. They signed Jose Quintana. So, this is an example of how the Brewers can do it a few different ways. Right now, they are the class of not only the NL Central, but of Major League Baseball in terms of an organization doing things in a really, really impressive way. Jose Quintana, they signed for a few $1 million. That's a free agent they bring in. They identify the right guy, and then he produces. 18 starts, 3.44 ERA. Chad Patrick. I don't know. That's who he is, Chad Patrick. 3.52 ERA. Where did he come from? Who knows? Doesn't matter. That's the development part of this. Freddie Peralta. Okay, your mainstays that you've had for a good long while. Find a way to get those guys healthy. 24 starts, 3.03 ERA. Quinn Priester. There's another guy you've developed. 17 starts, 22 total games, 3.49 ERA. Jacob Mizrowski, one of the top prospects and now one of the young studs in Major League Baseball, 2.70 ERA. And then Brandon Woodruff is back, and he's shoving for them. You could talk about, the trades that they've made in the past. The trade for who's the pitcher that they gave up? Gosh dang it, a couple of years ago. Corbin Burns. Believe that was the deal that they sent him to the Baltimore Orioles. DL Hall was one of the names that came over in that trade. He's pitching out of their bullpen, made a few starts, 2.83 ERA this season. I think about a name like Aaron Ashby, who's been a former starter, kind of flamed out injury. He's now pitching to a 2.1 ERA. I don't know if all these guys are currently on their active roster right now, but just looking at their season-long stats, it's unbelievable. Rob Zastrinsky, I'm not saying his name right, but I'm just going to tell you that he's been around the block for a while, and they've even gotten some good production out of him at times this season, 2.03 ERA. Their pitching is unbelievable. And then there's like the mainstays of their bullpen, Trevor McGill, Nick Mears, excuse me. I mean, Jared Koenig, they have just done an unbelievable job with pitching. So the Cardinals aren't that. And they're not what the Brewers are offensively, but they're not necessarily terribly far away from what the Brewers are offensively. This would be the blueprint of how the Cardinals, despite not having a top 50 player, could ascend into doing some Brewers-like things, at least on one side of the ball. And then they're going to be a little behind on the other side. But let me read you offensively what the Cardinals are. And again, I read you all those OPSs. It's like 10, 11 guys that are OPSing above 700. And 700 is not this great number, but you get as many guys above 750 as the Brewers have, which is, 6 or 7 of them. You're talking about a lineup that there's just no holes in that lineup. You're not going to get shut out the number of occasions that the Cardinals get shut out because the Cardinals do not have the consistency offensively because they don't have the 1 through 9 going at all times. But how far away are they from being able to do that? Ivan Herrera, 839 OPS. Wilson Contreras, 787. Burley is a 782. Donnie, as I mentioned, is 757. Right, that's 4 guys, pretty solid, all above league average. Nolan Gorman, 725. Okay, he's really come on strong recently offensively. We'll see what it ends up being defensively. I was not pleased with, his play defensively at third base yesterday. It sounds like after we interviewed Chip Carey earlier today on the Randy Show that they're just going to continue to ride with Nolan Gorman at third. I would have made the case that, look, if you're trying to win ball games, maybe you do switch it up. So JC would start at third, Gorman at second, might be a better alignment for that defense. But they might want to see through what it looks like for Nolan Gorman defensively at third because he came up as a third baseman. Right now it's ugly, and maybe it's a little bit in his head when it comes to the throwing that he is, having a real problem with. A couple of throwing errors last night specifically. His arm is a strong suit of his game. The accuracy of it right now is what's kind of getting to him, and hopefully it doesn't become a thing. But that's fine. If they continue to play him at third base, I think I can totally understand that. It is supposed to be evaluate, develop, those sorts of things. And right now the Cardinals are still on the periphery of any sort of wild card conversation. So, yeah, you're probably rightfully looking to continue to pour into Nolan Gorman defensively because offensively, you look at his recent game logs, he's been really solid for you. And that brings us back to his 725 OPS. All right, so that's 5 guys regularly. And I'm glossing over Joe Pozo, because he's more of a bench bat. I'm glossing over Jose Fermin, who is down in Memphis right now, but he's OPS over 1,000 with the Cardinals this season. Kind of crazy. But let's get down a little bit further. This is where you start to get into the conversation. Mason Wynn, 706 OPS. If he's 10 to 15 to 20% better, which I think he's more than capable of being, if he's OPSing 730, 740, well, then he's just like another one of those cogs in the machine that the Brewers have offensively. So now you've got 6 on a daily basis that are pretty solid to above average. Lars Nootbaar, 699 OPS. He's been a little bit below his career norm. If he would have been at career norms this year, he would have been another cog in that machine. That's 7. All right, Nolan Arenado, that's a big example of what's not working. In the way that Christian Yelich has kind of aged and dealt with injuries, he's still continued to produce offensively for them. The difference for the Cardinals, their veteran of that status is Arenado, and his offense has really tailed off. He's OPSing 660, and you probably, even though they're going to strengthen up the shoulder and try to get him back and see what happens, you can't necessarily expect that to suddenly change as he's getting into his mid-30s. So that's one key stark example where the Cardinals, I don't think their veteran is going to do what Christian Yelich is doing for the Brewers. Arenado's just, you can't expect it at this point. But okay, that's the first time we've gone, all right, they're not even close on one of these examples. And by the way, Arenado still plays great third base defense. Thomas Saggese, he's OPSing 647. He's starting to come around a little bit at the plate. If you can continue to find opportunities for him, does he turn into like that Caleb Durbin example where it's not a star, but he's a solid enough ball player, and you don't have to hide him in your lineup every night. He can contribute, right? They're not too far away from Thomas Saggese perhaps being that type of player. Jordan Walker is a big example of what could be, what might have been, and what maybe still could become. But he's OPSing 629. Certainly he needs to be another guy in that 750 conversation. And so we're isolating right now. It's Arenado, which I think is not going to be a long-term situation. And then it's Jordan Walker. Can he become even a semblance of what the hope for Jordan Walker was? If yes, then the Cardinals are much closer to the Brewers than maybe one might imagine that they would be. And then the other one is Victor Scott II. 614 OPS, looked overmatched at times at the plate this year. Strikeouts are starting to mount for him. Can he become in that Caleb Durbin category? Can he become that Sal Frelick, right? Because Sal Frelick, good defender. Blake Perkins is another guy I didn't mention with the Brewers, but he's got good numbers offensively for them this season in more of a limited sample, but a really good defender as well. They need Victor Scott II to become what the Brewers have in a Blake Perkins. And so it's really like a Jordan Walker. It's Nootbaar being a little better than he's been. It's Mason Wynn being a little better than he's been. But even with Mason Wynn and Nootbaar, you can get away with that. It's Walker and it's Victor Scott. Those are the two guys that, man, if they were on the Brewers, it feels like they already would be churning out a 740 OPS. And in Vic's case, he'd be playing sterling defense, which he is. Vic's already got more than 30 stolen bases. He'll probably be the first Cardinal in a good long while to steal 40. That's probably happening this year. But, man, they're not that far off when you think about the way that the lineup breaks down. Pitching, I got nothing for you. The Cardinals have some ways to go. I would say they're starting to make some good strides when you think about the bullpen. Kyle Leahy, kind of one of those guys that came out of nowhere, at least in the perception of the rest of the league. He's doing a great job. Jojo Romero, Matt Swanson. Like, okay, we're starting to see some things turn in the right direction there, but you're going to need more pieces. You're going to need more guys, and certainly on a starting pitching front, you're going to need a little bit more. But the Cardinals, I don't think, are quite as far off, and that's why we look at this win last night over the Colorado Rockies as a really significant one, because after beating the Dodgers 2 of 3, beating the Cubs 2 of 3, you couldn't afford to start with your foot in your mouth when it comes to this Rockies series. You had to find a way to win game one because, frankly, you need to be sweeping it. If we're going to continue to have that conversation about the Cardinals in this mix, which is starting to be a conversation that over the past week is beginning to ramp up again, you got to beat the Rockies. And so we'll see if the Cardinals are able to do that on Tuesday behind Matthew Liberatore. It's going to be very interesting to see what he can become. It was an interesting note, too, that Chip Carey kind of threw into the conversation this morning and says, maybe Kyle Leahy's role is a little bit tied to what happens with Libby. Because if Libby continues to falter, the Cardinals need to really go an extra step to manage his innings, manage his workload, and potentially go to the extent of, and this wasn't everything that Chip laid out, but I'm kind of thinking through it, the extent of maybe piggybacking with Kyle Leahy instead of having it be Miles Mikolas, who, again, I said should move to the bullpen last week. I also said you're going to have good starts from him. If he could do what he did last night every single time, that wouldn't be a conversation. He'd have an ERA at 3.5, and he would be the Jose Quintana of the Brewers rotation. He'd be doing that for the Cardinals. But he hasn't been quite consistent enough, especially on the road, to really be able to put forth those types of numbers. And so I did say what I said. I wrote what I wrote. And I was saying I wouldn't get rid of Miles Mikolas because there's value to be had there when it comes to giving you innings. But I think the more quality innings could come from Kyle Leahy if they would be willing to stretch him out. They may be holding him back to wait and see what happens with Libby. It'll be interesting to see tonight because the Cardinals are opposing another left-handed starter, Kyle Freeland. He's got a 5.5 ERA. I know the Cardinals have struggled against lefties, but get your right-handed bats in there. Maybe Pozo gets in there behind the plate. So JC should be back in there once again. Burley from the left side will be in there. I would go ahead and put Nolan Gorman right back in there as well. Jordan Walker, find a way to get him in there. Nootbaar fouled the ball off his knee last night. He'll probably be out of the lineup, and that'll be the way that you get Walker into it. And, we'll end up seeing what happens. Is it going to be another Garrett Hampson appearance, or can you give Victor Scott II an opportunity? That's what I would do. I would continue to pour into him. And, hey, when they face some righties, I would even consider putting him at the leadoff spot. So, number of different ways that they could go about it tonight. Obviously, Donovan probably back in the lineup compared to last night where he wasn't. So, that's one more spot that you don't have for somebody else. But can the Cardinals get to lefty Kyle Freeland? And then can they get to another one tomorrow afternoon against Austin Gomber? That's going to be the challenge. 2 lefties the rest of the way. But the Cardinals go sweep this series. Don't worry about what other teams are doing. For the fans, yeah, go ahead, scoreboard watch. For the Cardinals, sweep this series. Because if you do, you will have suddenly won 7 of your last 9, and you'll be welcoming the Yankees to town for a high-profile series over the weekend. I believe there's another national TV game on one of those weekend days. So it's not over. I know I said at certain points in time, it's over if they don't do this, that, or the other. Well, you kind of get reminded of how long the baseball season is when you see the ebbs and flows, and frankly, you see the Mets collapse in the way that they have. That's the only thing that's opened the door again for the Cardinals. But now that it's open, maybe consider walking through it. We'll see what the Cardinals are able to do tonight and as the rest of this series and homestand unfolds. But appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in to B-Schaeff Daily. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy daily St. Louis Cardinals content. I'm going to be the one trying to bring it to you at least as often as I possibly can with the various cookie jars that I have my hands in these days when it comes to sports content. But appreciate you guys, as always, for listening, and we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.